The US accuses Russia of sending fighter jets to Libya. Moscow says it wants a ceasefire. Its ally Khalifa Haftar has suffered losses after Turkish military interventions. What are the options for stabilising Libya in an increasingly complex war? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Bernard Smith. Russia is one of the main players in the war in Libya. It supports warlord Khalifa Haftar, who wants to take the capital, Tripoli, from the UN-recognised government. But the campaign has suffered a series of setbacks. Officials in Tripoli said Russian transport planes moved out hundreds of mercenaries who'd been fighting with Haftar's forces in southern Tripoli. Russia is now calling for an immediate ceasefire. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov told an ally of Khalifa Haftar that he backs what he calls a constructive dialogue involving all Libyan political forces to end the conflict. But at the same time, Russia is accused of sending warplanes to Libya. The US military says these photos show Russian fighter jets arriving recently via Syria to support Haftar's forces. It says the planes were repainted to conceal their origin. A Russian MP rejected the allegation as fake news. Russia isn't the only country involved in the war. The UN-recognised Government of National Accord, based in the capital Tripoli, has the backing of Italy, Qatar and Turkey. Recent Turkish military intervention has helped its forces push Haftar back from southern Tripoli and other parts of the northwest. The warlord launched an offensive to take the capital more than a year ago. Haftar is backed by a rival administration in Tobruk in the east. The UN says 1,200 Russian mercenaries were deployed to help Haftar's forces. Egypt, the United Arab Emirates and France also provide support. Let's bring in our guests. In Metuchen, in the US state of New Jersey, we have Jason Pack, a founder of the consultancy Libya-Analysis, LLC. And in Vienna, Wolfgang Pusztai, a security and policy analyst and Austria's former defence attaché to Libya. And in Tripoli by phone, Sami El-Atrash, a lawyer and head of the political office of the Libyan National Assembly February 17 revolution. Welcome to you all. Jason, first of all, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov says he wants a ceasefire, while we hear that the Russians have sent 14 disguised fighter jets to Libya. What's going on?
Well, that's not as paradoxical as it may seem. One always wants to negotiate from a position of strength rather than one of weakness. The Russians are on the back foot, as are their clients, the LNA, and therefore the Russians and the Emiratis, for the first time in a long time, are talking about ceasefires, because when you're losing and the momentum is against you, it's a very convenient time to be calling for a ceasefire. Of course, they knew that those fighter jets would be discovered. They might not have known that AFRICOM would call them out as vociferously as they have. But the Russians still have a lot of leverage in the conflict, and they have been put on the back foot in the aerial war, but they're not lost. And it seems that they have a deal with their Turkish opponents that by withdrawing mercenaries from Beni Walid to Jufra, those mercenaries will now not be attacked in Jufra. And therefore, if they have withdrawn their air assets from places in the west, which they did, such as Watia, to Jufra, it seems like they won't be attacked there. And now we await the next phase in the battle for Tarhuna, as well as negotiations on a global scale about what will come next for Libya.
OK, Wolfgang, is that what it is? The Russians putting a gun on the table, but really everybody wants a ceasefire?
Well, actually, for the Russians, it's about to preserve their strategic interests in Libya. This means they intend, by all means, to maintain a foothold, at least in eastern Libya. To descend, for the time being, they want to prevent the LNA from getting defeated in Tripolitania. We'll see how far they will get. Maybe they will support with their recently arrived fighter jets also the offensive of the Libyan National Army again towards Tripolitania. but I doubt that a couple of fighter jets is enough to change the tide again and to allow the LNA to attack again towards Tripoli. It seems to be more likely that these fighter jets, if their number remains limited, have the purpose to buy just some time for the Libyan National Army to get closer to some kind of negotiated settlement. It could also well be that the purpose of these fighter jets is to deter the Turks and the Operation Volcano from attacking towards eastern Libya. We'll see. I guess the next days and weeks will show.
Okay, Sami, Turkey, the UAE have called for a ceasefire. Algeria, the EU is calling for a ceasefire. Are we going to get a ceasefire?
I would like to start really with the intervention of several states behind the scene, including France and Russia. Regrettably, they were not really playing the game in any principle or moral or clear stand, and therefore, since for 2019, they remained also actively in Libya, but without observing the rules. And of course, all the Libyans, I mean, most of the Libyans, or the free Libyans, or the revolutionary Libyans, they feel that they have been deceived by this unclarity of both France and Russia, in spite of their support to the international agreement signed on 17 December 2019, F15. Okay. Therefore, the game became very clear. Now the intervention became very clear, obviously to everyone, internationally, regionally, and locally. So for us, I mean, in Libya, the free revolutionary, they are rejecting, of course, any ceasefire or any negotiation unless the battle is finished with this military, because we feel that this coup d'etat started 2014 and ended now with failure in invading the capital of the democracy and the civil state.
Okay.
So therefore, we are not going to observe really any calls for ceasefire or negotiation until we finish the job.
Okay. Jason, not much optimism there, not much likelihood of a ceasefire coming from Tripoli, but all the major players seem to be asking for one. Is one going to be forced on them somehow?
Well, Sami is right. We've entered a new stage. If you would look at the Libya conflict from 2011 to now as having 5 stages, we've just entered the 5th. So the first stage is the 2011 Libyan uprisings, and those were uprisings, not a civil war, because the mass of the population opposed Gaddafi, and only about 20% of his core tribal supporters, like the Magarha, Qaddafifa, and some of the Warfallah and his family, supported him. Then we had some good years in 2012 and 2013. The oil price was high. There was an ability to rebuild. Mm-hmm. And then we had the first Libyan civil war. And that was starting in the summer of 2014. It was fought over the Tripoli airport, and the former revolutionaries fell out amongst themselves. So Zintan and Misrata, who had fought together against Gaddafi, fell out. And the HOR election was contested, with the parliament fleeing to the east. That war quieted down, but it led to the treaty that Sami was mentioning, the Skhirat Agreement of 17 December 2015. And rather than resolving matters, it complicated matters, because it introduced a third government, the GNA. And that government was not really produced inside Libya. And the international actors who said that they supported it actually supported different sides and began a proxy dynamic. This then led to the 4th phase, which is the second war of post-Gaddafi succession, or the war for Tripoli. That began on April 4, 2019. And former enemies and allies switched sides. So the Zintanis and Misratans, who fought together against Gaddafi, some of them worked together to oppose Haftar's attack on Tripoli in this new civil war. That second civil war has now ended with the fall of Watia Air Base, and we're entering a 5th phase. Will that phase be a ceasefire, a negotiated settlement? I don't think so. I agree with Sami that this ceasefire talk is posturing. Force is still going to have to play out. There's an opportunity for the Turks, who have won. They are the victors of the second Libyan civil war. If the Turks wanted to be moderate and not push their advantage, they could be conveners. But everything about their previous behavior, about Erdogan's skills, show that they're unlikely to do that. And they're going to try to exact a victory dividend. And in so doing, the conflict will continue into this new and fifth uncertain phase.
Okay, Wolfgang, do you think we are relying on Turkey to push forward the idea of a ceasefire? Will Turkey go for that, or do they want to exact more before they go for that?
Well, I would say it's quite unlikely that Turkey will push for a ceasefire right now. We need to keep in mind what are the Turkish strategic interests in Libya. And one of the key interests is certainly to maintain and to continue with the Turkish-Libyan maritime agreement. If there would be a ceasefire right now, or if there would be a ceasefire after the LNA is defeated in Tripolitania, it could easily happen that the eastern part of Libya would split off. If the eastern part of Libya would split off, Turkey could forget about its maritime agreement, because whatever government there will be in Benghazi, they will certainly not endorse or sign any kind of agreements to the favor of Turkey. So for Turkey, it is crucial either to maintain one Libyan state dominated by a government favored by Turkey, or to continue towards the east. To continue towards the east, not only to the Sirte Basin, but also to Benghazi. And this could easily bring them in conflict with Egypt.
Sami, is the price that Turkey is exacting from the Tripoli government worth it? Is it worth giving Turkey access to these Mediterranean possible gas deposits in return for the support it's giving you?
Well, yes, to a great extent, yes, because as we know all, that Turkey interest will remain important more than the West, really, as far as their economical maritime interest is concerned. The East, is the connection to all the benefits of that the treaty which was signed lately. But nevertheless, I think while Turkey have committed itself to the protection to the legitimate government recognized internationally, nevertheless, I think they are caught now. They have to continue the journey with us, to liberate the whole country from the military junta and their militia. Unless we finish this cancer from our body as Libyans, I don't think we can really negotiate or set to build the Libyan civil democratic state. But there is something really I have to point out to the audience and to your guests and to myself. I have to remind ourselves that we should not drop at all the will of the people here, in spite of the stand of both the parliament or so-called parliament, the government currently of Mr. Sarraj, that it will remain the statement of the fighter is the main score point really in this challenge currently in the go. So we are determined. I'm talking on behalf of the Assembly of the Revolution of 17 February, that we are determined and we are really fully understood the fact that without eliminating and clearing up this military gesture, we will never be able really to build the dream which we hoped on 2011 upon the revolution of 17 February.
Okay.
So this is really a main point
All
which
right.
we have to consider in spite of the political stand of the government.
All right. Jason, if Turkey's strategic goals are to exploit potential gas reserves in the Mediterranean basin and to get contracts to rebuild Libya for Turkish construction companies, it needs stability to achieve those goals, doesn't it? It's not going to get much further without stability.
That would be a rational way of looking at it, and I would hope that that would prevail in Ankara. But as we know, the road to peace in Libya does go through Ankara, and Ankara has shown itself since Ataturk to be very good at the military, right? Ataturk was a military man, and the military dominated the Turkish state for its first 80 years after the Ottoman Empire. Erdogan has risen to power, and he has a problem with the military, which is Ataturkist, but he has carved out a patch for them. And it's a NATO country, and they have access to the best technology. And they've shown to good effect that they're able to use that technology and skills and to win in Libya. What Erdogan has not shown that he has the ability to do is to negotiate. He has not been a very good negotiator. He's a rogue internationally. He's ostracized from Europe. He hasn't honored some of the migrant deals. And frankly, I would love to see that he could pivot and extract a peace dividend. But it seems like they're going for a victory dividend. Do they need stability, as you mentioned? Maybe not. They want the GNA to give them back their construction contracts and back payments. But as Wolfgang smartly pointed out, they want to have a victory over all of Libya because it's only in the eastern waters that they can extract that gas dividend. The only power that can really bring together all of the sides and factions is America. Unfortunately, America has a bipolar policy towards Libya, and we're not going to see a new policy until the election in November. And that's something I'd like to talk more about. But, you know, we just have to hold our breaths because there's no will in either Europe or America right now to really do the serious heavy lifting and yeoman's work to convene the international community. So until that point, the Turks and the Russians are what we have in terms of actually trying to make it work.
And Wolfgang, what is Russia's strategic interest in Libya? We know the Europeans are particularly concerned about Russian interests in Libya. Why? Let us understand that.
Well, not only about Russian strategic interests, it's also about several other affairs or issues. With regard to Russia, Russia has in particular a geostrategic interest with regard to Libya. I would like to say that probably eastern Libya would be sufficient to achieve this. They are eager to establish a military base. They are eager to establish a naval base for the aircraft carrier in eastern Libya. There is the harbor of Tobruk, which would very well fit into these intentions. They are eager to use Libya for power projection and for expanding their influence towards the Sahara states. They are eager to get their share as Turkey on reconstruction of Libya. They are eager to get their foot into the door with regard to many other major projects in Libya. And actually, at the end of the Gaddafi time, like Turkey, there were many contracts with Russian companies, and Russia would be eager to continue with these contracts. However, it would be easier for Russia to live only with the eastern part of Libya than for Turkey to exist only with the western part of Libya.
Sami, when we hear all about these competing interests from outside forces in Libya, when are we ever going to arrive at the stage where people like you in the West are going to get together with people, Libyans in the East, and work out a future for your country together? It doesn't seem like that's on the horizon, does it?
Yes, I mean, finally, I mean, it will be really a settlement between the Libyan forces, while I reject really the use of the term civil war. I think completely it is not a proper description according to my understanding from the reality here in Libya. But however, we are ready to sit with the reasonable and people who believe in civil state and democratic institution and the rule of law. But we cannot really at this stage at all accept really any argument which come even to the contrary of the values set forth in the political agreement signed on, as we said, 15 December 2015. This have 32 rules which establish the state which the international community have agreed with the reasonable Libyans, and we are ready to go on with that. But the failure and the determination and the arrogancy of this military junta in the East, he is trying to return us back to the square one. And this is really the main problem. So the international community cannot cut corners anymore because they did for 1 year, hoping that he will be arriving to the power in Tripoli. Now, while the assault and the attack on the democratic institution started very early, I mean 2013 and 14, by clear declaration of coup d'etat and seizing of the constitution and all the other administrative organizations which have been elected according to democratic rules at the early stage of the revolution. So now the international community has seen all this and stood, including the United Nations, and the envoys of obviously ending by Dr. Salama, all they are watching the violations to all the democratic rules which all agreed, including the international community. So I wonder about this hypocrisy of international community watching the invaders watching the assault, watching the seize of the oil resources to the Libyan people. I mean, all kinds of violations, have been seen and felt by everyone. Yeah. So now, for us, we are determined, as I said, as Libyan free people, that either we make it or break it. There is no halfway now, because the attack have confirmed beyond any doubt that the military, they are determined really to reach the power by any means, including the negotiation tactic, which we understood that very clearly, and also the international community have understood that clearly.
All right, Sami. Jason, AFRICOM, the US African Command, it was unusual for it to state so clearly that it suspected these jets were coming from Russia. Can we take some hint from the US that they are paying attention to what's happening in Libya, or is it, as you suspect, that they're not really going to get involved in an election year?
Well, to first address Sami's point there, yes, it would be lovely to have a Libyan peace process, and the only solution is a Libyan one. It can't be imposed from outside. But unfortunately, Sami showed the zero-sum thinking that prevails in Libya. He calls his opponents a military junta without pointing out that the Easterners have legitimate grievances about the distribution of wealth and power from the Gaddafi period institutions. So that's a shame, and it's going to require much more dialogue and openness than he points out. Now to pivot to the very good question that you've mentioned, AFRICOM's statement calling out the Russian jets has to do with the bipolarity of American policy. And that's that on the one hand, we have civil servants and experts and professionals, and on the other, we have Team Trump and appointees. And this is something that all Americans are familiar with vis-a-vis the coronavirus response. The experts and the health officials say, hey, we can't open up, and please wear a mask, and we've got to flatten the curve. And then Team Trump and the vice president says, we're going to reopen by Memorial Day, that it'll be behind us. The president appears in public without a mask and says everything is fine, we need to reopen the economy. So in the Libya case, this bipolarity is that Trump called Erdogan and asked for a ceasefire, and Pompeo last week called Siraj and said, oh, we don't want any foreign interference, don't push the advantage, don't have the Turks come in. So Team Trump and the appointees do the bidding of the UAE. And we've seen that before when Trump called Haftar in April of last year. Whereas the experts and the professionals and the civil servants, they are motivated by the traditional American foreign policy aims of deterring Russia.
All right, Wolfgang, no coherent American response. And the EU also, give us the view from Europe. We have France on different sides of the Italians. The EU is also seeming powerless to try and bring calm to Libya.
Well, currently the European Union can do next to nothing about the situation in Libya. The reason is easy. Currently that's a military conflict. Turkey is using the military tool of strategy. They use the military tool of strategy to counterbalance the Libyan National Army. Now Turkey is pursuing a success in Libya with the military tool of strategy. What shall the European Union do? Shall they bomb Turkey or shall they bomb the Libyan National Army? The Europeans do not interfere in a war as such. That's simply not the way the European Union works. The European Union could get again into the game if there is an opportunity, if there is a break or a stalemate, that they could again try to broker a ceasefire. You mentioned the different European interests. This is understandable. If you look just to Italy and to France, Italy has key economic interests with regard to Libya. The Italian economic interests are mostly focused on Western Libya.
Okay.
Italy has key security interests also focused to Western Libya, in particular to migration. For France, it's different. For them, what counts is counterterrorism. Counterterrorism, which is a particular threat for the French vital strategic interests in the Central Sahara region. And therefore, the French are also leaning towards the Libyan National Army. If you want to fight terrorism safe havens in southern Libya, the only one choice you have to cooperate with is the Libyan National Army. Right. You may like it or not.
All right. We are unfortunately out of time, but thanks to Jason Pack, to Wolfgang Putztai, and in Tripoli to Sami El-Atrash, and thank you too for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. We are at AJ Inside Story and I am at Jazeera Bernard. From me, Bernard Smith, and the entire team here in Doha, bye for now.